Welcome back, AP. Well, let's go ahead and get into it. Like I said in class today, this is kind of setting the foundation for this unit, right? This new unit that we're starting in. I refer to it mainly off of one of the guys that I learned this stuff from as the Age of Genius, right? I like to teach the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment at the same time, mainly to try and give you an understanding of how it radically changed life, how it changed politics, and how it changed the progression of European history going forward. But we're starting in the 1600s, right? We're going to kind of set the foundation of what life was like in the 1600s. And if the fact of the matter is that some of these thinkers had come before the 1600s, but their works weren't taken as seriously as they should have been. But let's go ahead and get started. So, first and foremost, write the Royal Society of London. Do not write anything in this flip unless I tell you to. The Royal Society of London, and write the Men of London, like right from here to right there at the very end, okay? So before. So right from the men to before. So anyway, to give you a heads up, the Royal Society of London was the first scientific society that had actually been born out of the early 1600s. The Men of the Royal Society were some of the world's first scientists. Big, very important, this is what I was talking about, titans of intelligence had come before them. Guys like Kepler, Galileo, Descartes had done a lot of really, really monumental work long before the Royal Society actually ever broke ground. But the Royal Society was a great transitional keystone place for a couple of reasons, mainly because of the fact that it was in England, which was a non-participant in the 30 Years' War. It held on to and secured a lot of the scientific workings of people like Galileo, Kepler, Descartes, Copernicus, people like that. And they allowed for colossal new people coming in like Newton to come forward and further develop their theories. The story of early science, though, is not one of, had more to do with collaboration than it did with solitary contemplation, right? So the Royal Society in London, very, very important. Now, they all lived between two worlds, okay? So write this one, that to right here, just a glimpse, right? So they all lived precisely located between two worlds. The medieval one that they had grown up with and the new one that they had only began to kind of peer into, right? So the thing about the scientific revolution, in the beginnings of the scientific revolution, going forward into the Enlightenment, is the fact that most of the world was still deeply, deeply pious. Very, very pious, and kind of viewed God in a very different way. They had three different views of people. They had a view of man, they had a view of God, and they had a view of nature. Okay, so write down view of man, view of God, view of nature. The view of God was one of an all-powerful, always spiteful, God-fearing. You understand what I'm saying? A spiteful, ambivalent, vengeful God. The one that literally enacts terrible things onto people in forms of punishment. The plague was a punishment, right? Stuff like that. They all believed in angels, alchemy, the devil, things like that. Their view of man was imperfect, terrible, prone to evil, things like that. Their view of nature was product of God, and everything about it was in perfection according to godly standards, okay? So there you go, though. But they believed in angels and alchemy, the devil. They believed the universe followed also the precise mathematical laws. So the London in the 1600s was marked by precariousness and death struck oftentimes at random, right? So this is very important. Write this slide down. So in London, under the Royal Society, which is, like I said, the real nesting hub of the scientific revolution that was set up by guys like Galileo, Descartes, Copernicus, Kepler, all those guys beforehand. But there is a very good transitional period, the 1600s in London. Children were dying in droves. 12% of children died within the first year of life. 12%. That's 1 out of every 10, roughly. It's insanely high. Even for the nobility, the richest, the most elite, life expectancy was really, really actually precariously short. You only lived to be about 30 years old. Adults in their 20s, 30s, 40s, they could drop dead out of the blue, out of the thin air, no reasons really why, leaving their families in desperation. Now, deaths are going to begin to outnumber births in London, and the only reason London was able to actually keep a consistent population was due to the immigrants coming in, okay? So medical knowledge also at the time was borderline, write this down, borderline non-existent. So doctors were more likely to harm patients than they actually were to heal them. You could go to a barber shop to get teeth pulled, dentistry, surgeries done, and also get your hair cut at the exact same time. So medical knowledge, being a doctor didn't require an excessive amount of training. Being a doctor was on par with being like a blacksmith in a way. It was more like a trade craft, but it wasn't a perfect science because there was no science to back it up with. They all believe still in things like bloodletting, leeches, potions, and things like that. For example, getting into it, don't write this down, but there's the sickness called gout, right? And gout is crystallized forms of lactic, I don't know if it's lactic acid, but the crystallized forms of the fluid that actually goes between your joints that make the popping noise, right? Like popping comes from the air leaving that fluid inside of your joints. So that begins to crystallize and harden, causing a lot of pain. That's gout. They believed during the 1600s that a way to prevent gout was to make a potion of puppy boiled with cucumber and juniper root. Like these little guys would be made into a potion to cure your gout, which we know, and now as we sleep, breathe, live, and do our regular lives, there's no way that that's real, all right? These three things went together to make a potion that would cure your gout. Not to mention the fact that you don't have to write this next thing down either, but by as late as 1699, the Royal Society still debated on the health benefits of drinking what was quoted in Newton's diaries, cow piss drank by about a pint. They believed that drinking cow urine was a way to cleanse your body out. Like, no, all right? So not a good call, okay? Like, even though these men were deeply intelligent and believed in scientific experimentation and really came up with laws of gravitation and force, they still were massively behind in things like medicine. Like really, like they weren't. Okay, so what I'm trying to get across is that the history books try to tell a story that the world shifted 100%. It didn't. It was a slow progress that started around 1535 with Copernicus and his ideas on the celestial bodies, right? But it's still a lot of shakeup, right? Still a lot. For example, don't write this down. This is a really good story. You'll like this stuff. When Charles II had a stroke in 1685, the guy that we just got done talking about in England, the guy that took over after Cromwell's failed son under the Protectorate, doctors were called in. The first thing they did was they drained 2 cups of blood out of him, thinking it was going to fix the problem because it was like, oh, it had to be polluted blood. So they used leeches and they used a series of little knife tools that I'll show you in a second. But they drained 2 cups of blood out of him. That's a decent amount. That's about a pint of blood they just drained out of him. Charles lay there in a borderline coma, unable to speak out of one side of his face and enduring extreme pain. They then decided to rub an ointment of pigeon dung and powdered pearls all over his feet because that will be the thing that draws the negative energies out of his body. Then they shaved his head and seared his skull and his bare feet with red-hot irons like that one because they thought, oh, wait, we'll draw the negative substances out of his body by forcing them to go to these burned areas at the poles with his head and his feet. Again, stupid, right? Very painful. Then they administered an enema, a purgative, and a dose of sneezing powder, thinking, oh, well, we'll just get his body to expel everything disgusting that's in there. Then they drained another cup of blood using these guys, these leeches, and these are the bloodletting tools. They would actually take these bloodletting tools and lay it over your artery and hit it with a hammer and then drain it out that way. And so then, still to no effect, nothing helped. The king fell into an extreme convulsions, and the doctors prepared a potion, which principal ingredient was 40 drops of extract of human skull. Needless to say, 4 days later, the king dies. Really? You think? Are you surprised? So doctors basically tortured him for over a week and killed the King of England, who was supposed to receive the best medical treatment, okay? Now, this further kind of understands, write this down. This further kind of gives emphasis to the fact that 2 killers were running rampant at the time that inspired a lot of fear more than any other. One was the plague, right? Because they were still kind of reeling off of it from the 1300s and always fearful that it would come back again. And also, after the 1300s, it came on and off again. Like, the plague killed a lot of Shakespeare's early actors. So, came on and off again, but they had gotten better about quarantining it. One was the plague. The other was the end of days. They always thought the apocalypse was right around the corner. And they always were very fearful, apparently, of the year 1666, which is when Isaac Newton thought that the world was going to end. Okay? So, this was exemplified usually by natural disasters as precursors to the end of days coming. So, now, speaking of the plague, write this down really quick. There was a resurgence of the plague in 1665, and it actually killed 1 out of every 4 of the residents in London. There's this guy named Pepys, P-E-P-Y-S. He is a guy that actually wrote journals and articles about the effects of the plague. Said it started out with only about 3 people, and then it exploded all over the entire city. Homes would be marked with a red cross, and then that's how people would know that there was plague inside of that house, and they would try to quarantine them away, but it was still spreading around because there were dead bodies in the streets, and people were still going to the bathroom in the streets, and like it still wasn't as advanced of a society, even though we just got done talking about absolutism, as we would like to believe it. Now, the other thing about the 17th century was that God-fearing was still at an all-time high, in the most literal sense, okay? Natural disasters were considered divine. So write this to right here, okay? Like, so the 17th century was God-fearing in the most literal sense. Natural disasters were considered divine, right there. Messages, they were warnings of sinful mankind to change its ways, unless any angry, impatient God unleashed further rounds of punishment, right? Even today, insurance companies refer to earthquakes and floods as acts of God on your insurance, right? So this is still like a hangover that we're still using and still reeling from. One of the big things was, one of the biggest examples of like the end of days coming was the Great Fire of London in 1666. What did you think was going to happen when you built an entire like city out of wood? All right. So apparently on the other side of the London Bridge in one small house, a fire began. But since the streets were so crammed together and all the homes were so packed together, it ended up burning out 25% of the city, and it burned for 3 straight days. All right. So in 1666 right here. Very, very massive, like natural disasters, with the apocalypse and the plague was something that people feared all the time. Like this is an example of a very famous piece of art. It's called Human Frailty. It's from 1656. It's by the artist known as Salvador Rosa. Now you can see a lot of different things, but this is one of the most famous articles that like basically all humans were just on the fringe of death all the time, right? So the 1600s were still just such a chaotic time with so many hangups from the Middle Ages. So the scientific revolution coming through this era is considered one of the most groundbreaking things to ever happen, okay? So going forward, I'm going to skip this stuff, and maybe we'll talk about it a little bit later. But it's a crossroads in European thought. Write this down. The crossroads in European thought was as the developments of the scientific revolution began to come forward, they found themselves straddling a line between the old and the new, right? The medieval and the current. Like, so are these scientific experiments really factual? Is the celestial body theories really factual? Is Copernicus right when he says that everything goes around the sun? So they straddled this line between astrology and astronomy, alchemy or chemistry, superstition or science, right? So we are going to stop there for tonight, and this is an important slide. Make sure you get this. These are kind of lingering questions that get us into our discussion tomorrow, and we're going to kind of talk a little bit about like just the chaos that was ensuing at this time, and how these scientific thinkers are going to begin to push forward and liberate people from this lifestyle and bring around the idea of science, experimentation, health, prosper, like really, really break down these like walls, okay? So, and bring Europe into the modern era, all right? Now, so we're going to stop there, and we're going to get into natural philosophy and where all that stuff started tomorrow. And yeah, so I'll see you guys then, all right? Have a good evening, guys.